Okay, good morning. So as you can see, we're not in the training academy, we're in my conservatory, but we're going to do a little lesson on skincare, especially to help you out at home with your home study in the skincare unit. So I know part of the criteria that you have to look at is the difference in skin types, skin characteristics, and skin analysis. Okay, so that's what we're going to look at today in little segments. So you can pick which one you want, and then you can fast forward to the rest, or you can just pick up the next one. It's up to you entirely. But we're going to start off first of all with the anatomy of the skin. So this is a very simplified version. We'll call it a cross section. Cross section of skin. So if we were to take a piece of our skin, slice it down the side and look right into it at that angle, this is a very simplified picture of what you would see. And just for today's lesson, this really is all we need to know, okay? Because we're going to be looking at sebum, which is the skin's natural oil, and we're going to be looking at pores. And for that purpose, this is really all we need. I'm not going into great detail in the pic. So here we've got our hair shaft. So every hair that we have coming out of the skin, is called a hair shaft. Okay. It sits inside something called the hair follicle. And the hair follicle is almost like a pocket that the hair grows out of. So within this pocket, we have something called a sebaceous gland. Sebaceous gland. A sebaceous gland can either be attached to a hair follicle and the oil within the gland seep out into the hair follicle to keep that hair nice and moist and supple, or it can directly seep out onto the skin surface. Okay. So within this sebaceous gland, we have something called sebum. That's probably really tiny, I don't know if you can read that, but I'll write it out on the next page bigger so you can see it properly. But sebum is, like I said, the skin's natural oil. And without sebum, the skin would be really, really dry and brittle. The hair would be very dry and coarse and brittle, and there'd be no shine to it whatsoever. It's important that we have sebum excreted onto the hair and onto the skin. The other little diagram we've got here is something called a sweat gland. Okay, it's also called a sudoriferous gland, excuse the spelling, a sudoriferous gland. And this will secrete sweat onto the skin through a pore. So the skin has to sweat. The whole function of a sweat gland is to regulate the skin's temperature. So if we get really hot, then we sweat. The sweat gland or sudoriferous gland really goes into action and we have more sweat appear on the skin. If we get cold, then they shrink up and they help to keep all the heat within the skin to stop us losing any heat. On top of our skin surface, if we were to have, I'll put this on here now, the sebum and the sweat, it forms something called an acid mantle. And the acid mantle is like the skin's protective layer. so it protects the skin from any bacteria getting in, but it also helps to protect the skin from losing too much, so losing too many salts, too many minerals, too much oil, too much sweat. These two together are really important in protecting us from bacteria and foreign bodies getting in through our tiny pores. Now, if you were having facial electrical treatments, there's one particular treatment which is great at breaking this layer down and allowing us to get right inside the pores to give it a good old clean out, and that is called a galvanic current. The skin is quite acidic, it's naturally acidic, it's pH value bordering up into the acid level rather than the alkaline level. To get through this invisible acid mantle, we would create a current which was an alkaline. If you remember from school doing physics, you put an alkaline on top of an acid and it helps to neutralise it, and that's exactly what it's doing. The current is forming this alkaline in the skin with our own salts, creating something called lye, and that will break down this lovely acid mantle and allow us to get in there to give it a really good clean. Anyway, that's for the future, for facial electrics. Why it's important for us now is when we're looking at things like comedones and whiteheads, blackheads, you can see where the little openings are in the skin and how they might get blocked up. So if your sebum, or your sebaceous gland, was creating too much sebum, this would be running out here, right into the hair follicle, the little hole where the hair is. A natural amount is fine, is keeping it nice and supple. But if you've got too much sebum running up there, two things would happen. You'd get a very oily feel to the skin, that shiny, oily feel, because you've got too much oil on there. But also, oil attracts dirt. So the dirt would stick onto this area here and create what we call a blackhead or a whitehead. Now, it doesn't start off black. A blocked pore or a blocked hair follicle will just first of all start off maybe just a little bit dull, a little, could be white. You could just have that little what we call a pustule or a papule forming. Normally a pustule, because that is the oil stuck in the top there, you can see that. Over time, that oil will do something called oxidate. So when we oxidate, when something oxidates, it has a reaction with the oxygen in the air, and that takes it down to that black colour, and it hardens up all that oil in the skin and creates what we know as a blackhead, which is also known as a comedone. So that's the one thing about having the too much oil. There was two things, because you get the shiny skin and you get the blocked pores. Somebody who's got a naturally oily skin, so they're producing a lot of sebum, will normally find their pores are larger to allow that sebum to come out onto the skin surface. A drier skin produces less sebum, and the pores are normally tighter. You don't see them so much. They're a lot smaller. They don't need to be large, because that sebum isn't coming out onto the skin surface. So that's the difference there in the pore size. So very quickly, we've looked at just this cross section of the skin. We've looked at where sebum is produced and where from, what action it's got, how it can form the blackhead, how the difference in pore size relates to the different skin types, and again, as a little extra, this nice protective barrier called the acid mantle, and we'll come back to that in later lessons, because there's taking it that bit further now, this acid mantle. But without this on our skin, we are opening our skin up to infection, into bacteria getting in, and dirt and debris. So that is a really important defence system that we have. Looking at the cross-section of skin, if we can just break it down for you, just take it a little bit more advanced, there are actually 3 different sections. Our top section is called the epidermis, and that's the top of our skin that we can see, the epidermis. Then we have the dermis, or normally we call this our true skin, because this is where we find all our structures. We get our collagen, elastin to give the skin that nice stretch and bounce. You get your hair follicles, your sweat glands, your sebaceous glands, your nerve endings. You can find those all in this area here, as well as this little thing here called an erector pili muscle. And what this action is here, this muscle, it helps to either lift the hair up if you have been touched, that sensory touch, the hair stands up on end, you get goosebumps. It pull the hair down to trap air underneath, so the erector pili muscle is in charge of giving us those goosebumps or not, for lots of variety of reasons. The bottom layer here is this fatty layer. It's called the subcutaneous layer. Sometimes it's called the hypodermis. It's exactly the same. And what the function of this layer is here is to protect us and to keep us warm. So the fat cells will act as like an absorption, a shock absorber, but also helps to insulate us, to keep us warm. Without these fat cells, we do tend to lose a lot of heat. We are more prone to be colder quicker. We can't retain the heat though. In our top layer here, the epidermis, we have 5 different layers within that. And this is where we see this, we call it a skin cycle, skin renewal cycle. We have the natural exfoliation of dead skin cells being shedded constantly throughout the day, every day and night, and new skin cells coming underneath. And we'll look at this in more detail in another lesson again. But our skin cells start off, as you can imagine, nice and full and bouncy. And as they compress and go through the epidermis, they move up through a process called mitosis, which is a skin reproduction, or cell reproduction rather. And they get flatter and drier, and eventually they go from this lovely fresh cell full of water and goodness and end up being a very flat, dry cell that's ready to be what we call desquamated, which is a natural way of being exfoliated. But let's not go into that now, because I can go on about that for ages. So that is just our cross-section skin and our blackheads and our pores. And I'll end it there and we'll pick back up on our skin anatomy.